Hi everyone. Welcome back to our channel, where stories aren't just told, they're felt. If you're someone who believes in empathy, justice, and truth, you're in the right place. They say time heals everything. But what if the wound keeps getting reopened again and again in everyday moments that most people don't even notice? Racism isn't always loud. It doesn't always scream through burning crosses or hateful slurs. Sometimes it whispers through silence, avoidance, and lost opportunities. Some might say, "Come on, things are better now. Why keep talking about racism?" Others might argue, "Exactly because it's hidden now, it's more dangerous than ever." Where do you stand? Before we get into the full story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more real voices, raw truths, and honest conversations to light. Every click counts, and every story matters. Now, let's begin. What if an ordinary morning could unravel everything you thought was safe? In a small town where routines mean comfort, one Sunday's silence was about to break louder than anyone expected. It was a quiet morning on the edge of Auburn Grove, a southern town stitched together with church bells, diner counters, and memories too old for the digital age. Elias Brooks, 74, adjusted his scarf as he stepped slowly from the passenger seat. His wife, Miriam, circled around the car and helped him out, gently taking his arm. The crisp air bit at their skin, but Elias welcomed it. Cold meant he was still alive. Every Sunday for the past 20 years, they'd had breakfast at Beacon Diner. Same booth, same order. Black coffee with eggs over medium for him. Sweet tea and oatmeal for her. They weren't just regulars. They were family to the people who worked there. "Table 4's open, just for you," Lena called from behind the counter as the bell over the door jingled. Elias smiled, tipping his cap. Miriam helped him sit down, then unwrapped her scarf and slid into the booth beside him. For a moment, all was warm, simple, good. The smell of pancakes and fried bacon filled the air. The jukebox hummed softly in the corner, and regulars nodded hello with familiarity. Lena came over with menus they didn't need. "You're glowing this morning, Mrs. Brooks," she said, pouring Elias's coffee. "It's the scarf. Covers the tired." Miriam chuckled, her hand resting lightly on Elias's wrist. They talked about the sermon they'd just heard at church, about how Elias was getting stronger after the stroke 6 months ago, and how the town seemed to be changing lately. Not bad, just different. New people, new tensions. But they held on to routine like it was an old hymn. Outside, a police cruiser rolled slowly down Main Street. Inside, Elias dipped his toast into his egg yolk and smiled. Then the door slammed open. 2 officers walked in. Officer Dylan Mercer, young, broad-shouldered, fresh out of training. Behind him, Sergeant Tom Randall, older but quieter, with eyes that scanned every corner before his boots touched the tile. Lena stiffened behind the counter. Everyone in the diner went still. Officer Mercer's voice rang out. "We got a call about a disturbance here. Need some IDs." No one responded at first. Then Elias set his fork down slowly. "What sort of disturbance, officer?" he asked, his voice even. "We'll be the ones asking questions," Mercer said, eyes already fixed on Elias and Miriam. Sergeant Randall looked uncertain, but said nothing. Miriam furrowed her brow. "We've just been sitting here, same as every Sunday." Lena stepped forward, her apron fluttering. "They've done nothing. Maybe someone called the wrong diner?" Mercer ignored her. "Sir, do you have ID on you?" Elias reached into his coat pocket and took out his wallet. Movement slow, but calm. You mind telling me what this is about? Possible loitering and refusal to comply with orders, Mercer replied, taking the ID without glancing at it. The room was still silent, but energy shifted. Whispers started. At a nearby table, Greg Sanders, a man Elias had once tutored as a boy, tapped record on his phone. Elias looked at Miriam. Her hand trembled slightly. Not from fear. From something older than fear. Recognition. When she reached for her purse, Mercer tensed. His voice rose, sharp. Ma'am, don't move your hand like that. Miriam froze, stunned. I was just getting his medical alert card. You were reaching for something. That's all I saw. Lena stepped forward again. Please, this is wrong. They're not causing any trouble. Sergeant Randall glanced nervously at Mercer, then stepped toward the couple. Let's take this outside. Easier that way. Elias, confused, struggled to rise. Miriam supported him. The table rattled. His cane clattered to the floor. Greg's phone kept recording. Another diner raised theirs. And just like that, a quiet Sunday turned into a story. Outside, the wind picked up. Elias clutched his coat closed, balance wavering. Miriam steadied him, her face calm but pale. Behind them, the diner remained still, until the door shut and the murmurs inside erupted. They had only come for breakfast. But in a world too quick to judge, sometimes even the gentlest men are mistaken for threats. And sometimes, ordinary Sundays are anything but. Sometimes, the distance between dignity and danger is just one assumption away. Elias Brooks had walked this town for decades. But on that Sunday, every step felt like walking a line someone else had drawn. Outside the Beacon Diner, the winter wind bit sharper. Elias shivered as he gripped his cane and made his way slowly toward the car. Miriam walked beside him, lips pressed in a tight line, eyes scanning the street, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, readiness. Behind them, Officer Mercer followed at a pace just a touch too close. Sergeant Randall lagged a few feet back, his brows furrowed, his silence growing heavier by the second. I need you to place both hands on the hood of the vehicle, Mercer said suddenly, loud enough for nearby pedestrians to turn their heads. Miriam stopped. He's 74 and recovering from a stroke. Mercer didn't blink. He reached into his coat. I need to make sure he's not carrying anything. Elias's brows drew together. Carrying anything? Officer, I came here to eat pancakes, not plot a robbery. Sir, don't get smart. I'm doing my job. No, son, Elias said quietly. You're confusing authority with instinct. And you're doing neither well. That was it. Mercer's hand twitched toward his belt, and for the first time, Randall moved. Dylan, Randall said, voice low but clear. We're not escalating this. Mercer didn't respond. His jaw was set like concrete. Across the street, a small crowd had started to gather. Lena from the diner stood just outside the door, arms crossed, her phone in hand. From the corner of Main and Sycamore, Jamal Whitaker, a local UPS driver on break, leaned against his van, recording. Elias turned slowly, leaning against the car for support. You want to search me? He asked. Fine, but you won't find anything but butterscotch candy and a receipt for heart medication. I'm not asking again, Mercer said, stepping forward. Dylan, Randall repeated, this time placing a hand on his partner's arm. He's not resisting. Miriam opened her purse and pulled out the small blue wallet marked with a red cross. Elias's medical alert card. She held it high, trembling slightly, then placed it on the hood. For your report, she said, her voice even, in case common sense doesn't make it in. There was a long silence, the kind that weighs more than words. Then, a voice cut through the tension. "Hey!" someone called from down the street. Heads turned. A tall man in a charcoal coat was jogging toward them, his phone in hand, his face tight with disbelief. "Dad?" It was Leonard Brooks, Elias and Miriam's only son. A civil rights attorney in Atlanta, he had driven in for a surprise visit, planning to join them for lunch. He'd seen the video online minutes earlier, posted by a high school student who happened to be eating waffles 2 tables away. Now he was here, and fury burned in his chest. "What's going on?" Leonard demanded, stepping between Elias and Mercer. "Sir, please step back," Mercer barked. "This is a police matter." "No," Leonard said, pulling out his ID and holding it eye level. "This is a legal matter, and the way I see it, you're violating my father's rights, publicly." "You're interfering," Mercer warned. "You're endangering," Leonard countered. Elias gripped his cane, catching his breath. "Leonard, son." "I'm fine, Dad." "But you're not." Sergeant Randall stepped between the 2 men, raising his hands. "Let's all take a breath." "We would have," Leonard said, "if you'd led with respect instead of suspicion." The gathering crowd now numbered more than a dozen. Phones were out. A few whispered names. Leonard Brooks wasn't just a local boy made good. He was the man who'd helped overturn a discriminatory housing policy just last year. His presence shifted the energy like thunder before the rain. A young woman stepped forward from the sidewalk. Amber Lee, a journalism major home from college. She'd once interviewed Elias for a school project on the town's black educators. "Mr. Brooks taught half the teachers at my school," she said aloud, to no one in particular. "And now he's a suspect?" Mercer's jaw flexed. The moment stretched thin. Then Randall spoke. Quietly, firmly. "Mr. Brooks, you and your wife are free to go." "What?" Mercer snapped. "We're just letting them walk?" Randall turned, his eyes hard. "We're not making a bad situation worse. Step back." Mercer hesitated. His pride battled with protocol. But finally, he stepped away. Leonard took his father's arm. "Let's get you home." Miriam brushed a hand against her husband's cheek. "You okay?" "I am now," he whispered. As they walked back to the car, Elias looked once more at the crowd, at the phones, the faces, some angry, some empathetic, some just confused. He wasn't the man who went looking for a fight, but he'd become the man who had to finish one. Because when your dignity is questioned on the street you helped build, silence is no longer protection. It's participation. And Elias Brooks had never been one to stand by quietly. What happens when the man they tried to shame is the same man who raised half the town? Respect, once forgotten, was about to return louder than ever. The video spread like sparks in dry grass. By nightfall, it had been reposted over 100 times. Some called it just another case. Others, something more, something breaking. "Retired teacher targeted," one headline read. Another, "This town's moral compass is named Elias Brooks." But it wasn't just news anchors talking. It was neighbors, old students, strangers across the country, typing, tweeting, recording reaction videos. One clip stood out. A former student, now a school principal, tearfully saying, "That man taught me to believe in myself. He shouldn't have to teach us how to treat him." At the Brooks home, the mood was quieter. Elias sat on the worn leather armchair, cane leaning against the side table. The television showed talking heads dissecting what had happened. But he wasn't watching. He was thinking. Across from him, Leonard stood pacing. The mayor called. She wants to meet. Says she's deeply concerned. Elias didn't look up. Only took 50,000 views to get concerned. Leonard paused. You want me to tell her no? Elias shook his head. I want you to tell her the truth, but do it calm. We don't win much with shouting. We never have. In the kitchen, Miriam poured tea with shaking hands. Not from fear, but weariness. She had stood beside Elias for 50 years, through sit-ins and slow change. But this had reopened wounds she thought time had closed. Outside their home, news vans rolled by slowly. A few young people had started placing flowers on their porch, holding handmade signs. One read, "That man is my father too." Back at the police station, the atmosphere was different. Officer Dylan Mercer sat across from Internal Affairs. His face was pale, jaw locked. You're aware your body cam malfunctioned, one investigator said. Mercer nodded. Yes, sir. And yet, 3 public recordings show you escalating interaction without cause. He said nothing. You said he reached for something aggressively. The video shows a wallet, then a woman handing you a medical alert card. Mercer shifted. I misread the situation. Did you misread the man? Or the skin? That question hung like smoke. Sergeant Tom Randall, who had filed a preliminary report that night, walked out of the review room and sat on the curb, head in hands. He had served this town for over 20 years. He knew Elias, had once attended his wife's literacy classes. He hadn't meant for it to go that way, but meaning didn't undo damage. Meanwhile, downtown, a community forum was forming, fast. Held at First Unity Hall, the space filled to standing room. The walls bore murals of local legends, including Elias himself, painted with children gathered around him in a classroom. Leonard stepped up to the mic. Cameras clicked. Phones streamed live. I'm not here tonight just as a lawyer or a son, he began. I'm here as a resident of a town that forgot its own heart. He paused, letting the silence settle. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't resist. He didn't threaten. But he did something much more powerful. He stood tall, even when others tried to push him down. And that should have been enough. Applause burst from the back rows. A teenage girl stepped forward. Tiana Clark, 17, who had been seated near the brooks that morning. She held up her phone. I recorded the whole thing, she said. I didn't know what else to do, but now I know I did the right thing. A few seats over, Pastor Harold Jennings, a towering man in a gray suit, stood. I baptized that boy Mercer. I'm not here to destroy him, but I will say this. If we don't teach our protectors how to see the full humanity in every face, they're not protecting anyone. That line made the evening news. Outside the hall, the crowd swelled. Chalk drawings on the sidewalk read, Legacy over labels, and Brooks Strong. Inside the Brooks home, Elias sat quietly as his voicemail pinged with messages. Former students, journalists, a councilman offering apology, a class of third graders who sent a group video saying, Mr. Brooks, we love you. He smiled at that one. Don't they have school tomorrow? He murmured. Leonard laughed for the first time that day, but the healing had only just begun. At the police station, Mercer was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Randall requested reassignment. The town council proposed a civilian oversight board the next morning, and at the heart of it all, the man who never raised his voice had sparked a chorus. That night, Elias stepped out onto his porch. The stars were out. The street was still. A candle flickered by the railing, placed there by someone who hadn't even said their name. He sat beside it and looked up. He had once taught children that history is not what happens to us. It's what we choose to do after it. And tonight, his story wasn't just his own anymore. True dignity doesn't need volume. It needs presence. And sometimes, a quiet man standing still says more than 100 voices shouting. It had been 3 days since the incident, and yet the town of Auburn Grove hadn't exhaled. The diner booth, where Elias and Miriam once sat, remained empty. Lena had set a white lily on the tabletop. A sign stood behind the syrup caddy, hand-drawn by a local kid. Reserved for Mr. Brooks, our teacher, our neighbor, our hero. Inside Beacon Diner, something had shifted. Customers spoke softer. They made more eye contact. The silence that once hung as comfort now felt like reflection. Elias had stayed mostly quiet since the forum. He hadn't made a public statement, hadn't joined any protest. But in doing so, he had become louder than ever. At Town Hall, the mayor, Elizabeth Rourke, called an emergency meeting. "I've lived here my whole life," she began. "I was in Mr. Brooks's 3rd grade class. He taught me what it meant to be seen." The room was full, standing room only. Ministers, students, retirees, even a few officers. Leonard Brooks sat beside Pastor Harold Jennings and LaToya Green, a local civil rights organizer who had flown in from Atlanta. The mayor's words rang honest, but the people wanted action. "We need policy," LaToya said, standing. "Not apologies. Where are the oversight systems? The training? The accountability?" Her voice didn't tremble. She had spent a decade visiting towns like Auburn Grove, where kindness often masked inertia. One by one, citizens came forward with stories. Small moments when they, too, had been stopped, questioned, dismissed. An older black woman recounted being asked if she belonged in her own driveway. A biracial teen described being followed through a store. What happened to Elias was not isolated. It was merely caught on camera. Back at the Brooks home, Miriam was sorting through dozens of letters, handwritten notes, children's drawings, even a quilt stitched by women from 3 different churches, bearing messages like, "Thank you for never lowering your voice, even when silenced." Elias watched her from the porch. "How many letters is that today?" 57, and counting." He held up his coffee cup for a refill. She brought it out with a smirk. "You're a celebrity now." "Let's hope not. I don't want fans. I want neighbors who listen." That night, local artist Julia Mendoza unveiled a mural downtown. It depicted Elias seated on a bench, cane in one hand, a book in the other. Around him were ghost-like silhouettes of children, students from over the years, listening intently. Painted beneath it, "When dignity sits, truth stands." Crowds came to see it. They left flowers, candles, and sometimes just tears. Among the crowd was Officer Randall. He stood back, cap low, eyes uncertain. Then slowly, he walked forward, left a folded note beneath the mural, and left in silence. The next day, the town paper published an op-ed, unsigned but widely assumed to be from Randall. "I've worn a badge for 2 decades. I thought fairness came with the uniform. But I failed a man I knew better than most, because I forgot that fairness starts with humility. I hope this town holds me accountable, because he deserved better. And still, he met me with grace." The article went viral. At the local high school, a group of seniors petitioned to rename the library after Elias. "He gave us books before we knew their value. The petition read. Now we want his name where we found our voices. Meanwhile, Leonard worked with town officials and Latoya to draft a community resolution. New officer training protocols, bias audits, citizen review boards. The document was named the Brooks Accord, and Elias, he simply kept showing up. At church, he sat on the same pew as always. At the grocery store, he greeted every aisle like a hallway of his old classroom. At the park, he read aloud to children on Wednesday afternoons, just like he used to. One reporter tried to interview him. Why not speak out, Mr. Brooks? Why so quiet? Elias smiled gently. Because shouting wasn't what saved me. Presence was. That Sunday, Elias and Miriam returned to Beacon Diner. The bell rang overhead. Silence fell. Then a wave of quiet clapping rose. From every booth, every counter stool. Lena guided them back to their seat, tears brimming. The lily was still there. This time, Elias picked it up, held it to his heart, and sat down. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Because when dignity stands tall, the world learns to sit down and listen. It's one thing to see the truth. It's another to confront it. What happens when a town stops whispering and finally speaks aloud? The mural of Elias Brooks had become a quiet pilgrimage site. Every morning, fresh flowers appeared. A high schooler taped a quote beside it. History is not just in books. Sometimes it walks beside us. In town meetings and grocery aisles, conversations that had once been avoided were now inevitable. People spoke in honest tones, some apologetic, some defensive, but all unable to pretend anymore. At the sheriff's department, change was no longer a discussion. It was a demand. Sheriff Dana Mallory, Auburn Grove's first black female sheriff, held a press conference on the courthouse steps. We are not here today to protect feelings, she said, flanked by city council members and community leaders. We are here to protect justice, and justice demands honesty. She announced mandatory, implicit bias training for all officers, the formation of an independent citizen review board, and a temporary administrative leave for Officer Jennings, pending a full investigation. The decision stirred both support and pushback. In local diners, voices rose. He didn't mean it, some argued. He was just doing his job. Others pushed back, and Elias was just walking to his car. Debate spilled over onto porches and church basements. But unlike before, the town wasn't sweeping it away. It was wrestling with it. In one powerful moment, Principal Sharon Kim at Auburn Grove High called for a school-wide assembly. Students filed into the gym, buzzing with curiosity. A large screen lit up, displaying the footage. Elias standing in the parking lot, cane in hand, calm voice, firm. Officer Jennings's accusations. Leonard's voice breaking through. That man is my father. Afterward, Principal Kim stood center stage. I want every student here to understand. What happened to Mr. Brooks wasn't about a mistake. It was about a pattern, and you are the generation who can change it. Silence. Then one student clapped, then more. And suddenly, the gym echoed not with cheers, but with resolve. Meanwhile, at the library, soon to be renamed the Elias Brooks Public Library, local volunteers hosted open forums, inviting people to speak their truths. Maria Delgado, a mother of 3, stood and shared. I've lived here 20 years. My kids still get called the Mexicans by neighbors. We bake for your bake sales. We teach in your schools. But sometimes, we're still seen as strangers. The room stayed quiet, but no one looked away. One elderly man stood next. I fought in Korea with a black man named Robert. He saved my life. I never forgot. But I forgot to speak up when my friend said the N-word like it was just slang. I won't stay silent again. Stories like these began to pour out, pockets of discomfort opening into rivers of reflection. And Elias, he sat in the back row of every meeting, every vigil, listening, occasionally nodding, rarely speaking. Until one night, at a community dialogue hosted at the town theater, the mic was passed to him. He stood slowly, cane tapping once against the wooden floor. The room hushed. I've spent a life in classrooms, he began. Some lessons come from chalkboards, others from moments like this. He paused. We are not defined by the worst things that happen to us. We're defined by what we do afterward. He looked out at the audience. Teachers, police officers, students, neighbors. This isn't just about me, he continued. It's about whether you see your neighbor's fear as your responsibility, whether you meet pain with defense or with change. The applause started small. Then it grew, thunderous, united, whole. Even the most reluctant hearts felt something shift. Outside that night, a group of middle schoolers stood around the mural, forming a circle. Their teacher, Mr. Carter, had brought them there after the forum. What do you see? He asked. One girl spoke. I see someone strong. Another added, someone who didn't yell, but we all heard him. Mr. Carter nodded. And what does that mean? A boy looked up. That we don't have to be loud to matter. We just have to stand. That week, City Council passed the Brooks Resolution, formally acknowledging systemic bias in town departments and committing to community-led reform. It included funding for mental health resources, de-escalation training, and education programs in schools. Mayor Rourke delivered the final vote in chambers, her voice trembling. For too long, comfort kept us quiet. But Mr. Brooks's silence held more truth than all our excuses combined. Elias and Miriam were seated behind her, holding hands. That night, they walked home through Auburn Grove's tree-lined streets. Neighbors waved. Cars slowed respectfully. Even the local pastor stepped out of his church to tip his hat. Miriam looked at Elias, smiling gently. You didn't raise your voice. You raised the whole town. He chuckled softly. I didn't raise anything. I just didn't lower myself. The mural remained. The meetings continued. But the most lasting change wasn't in paint or policy. It was in the way Auburn Grove looked at itself. Not with shame, but with accountability. Not with guilt, but with responsibility. Because when a town reckons with the truth, it doesn't just change its laws. It changes its heart. Some legacies are built not in moments of fame, but in the silence that follows truth. The weeks rolled on, but something in Auburn Grove had permanently shifted. Not just in policy or public statements, but in how people walked, greeted each other, even paused before making assumptions. As the town carried on, Elias Brooks quietly returned to the rhythms he loved most. Sunday mornings, the booth by the window at Beacon Diner was once again his. Lena made sure of that. Fresh coffee, eggs over medium, Kane resting beside him, Miriam always beside him. No one whispered anymore when he walked in. They nodded. They smiled. A few even stopped by the table just to say, "Thank you." But Elias never let the attention linger long. "It's not about me," he'd say with a wave of the hand. "It's about the reminder." What reminder? That dignity should never have to be defended. That decency should not depend on memory or fame. That every citizen, no matter their age, color, or condition, deserves to feel safe on a walk to the car. Leonard, his son, had gone back to work, but remained active on the Police Reform Committee. He met regularly with Sheriff Dana Mallory and other leaders, working to implement lasting change beyond press conferences. Leonard was still fierce, still protective, but now he carried something deeper than anger. He carried resolve. And then there was Tessa, Elias's teenage granddaughter, who had started a podcast called Legacy in Silence. In one episode, she interviewed veterans, janitors, retired teachers, asking what it meant to live a life that mattered, even if no one was watching. Her first guest? Her grandfather. He didn't say much, but what he said echoed, "Respect isn't a reward, it's a right." The town library, now officially renamed the Elias Brooks Public Library, hosted a monthly speaker series where voices from across the region came to discuss equity, compassion, and healing. The inaugural talk was led by Miriam. She stood in front of a packed audience, clutching the edges of the podium. Her voice, soft but steady, filled the room. "I watched my husband get mistaken for a threat," she said. But what they didn't see was the man who paid his neighbor's mortgage during the recession. The man who tutored kids for free after school. The man who buried 3 of his friends and still got up every day to say good morning to strangers. A hush fell over the audience. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die," Miriam continued. "It's what people do with what you lived." After that night, more people began sharing their own stories, of moments overlooked, of slights dismissed, of fear endured, but also of strength found, of bridges rebuilt. Elias rarely spoke at those events. He didn't like attention, but he showed up, week after week, sitting quietly in the back row, his presence a living symbol of what patience, clarity, and moral fortitude looked like. On the 1-year anniversary of the parking lot incident, the town held a community walk, a symbolic journey from the church, past the diner, to the civic center. Hundreds attended. Families brought signs. Veterans stood at attention. Students from Auburn Grove High led chants of hope and accountability. And at the front of the line walked Elias, slow but determined, with Miriam on one side and Leonard on the other. Tessa held a camera, recording every step. A local news anchor asked him afterward, "Mr. Brooks, what do you hope this march tells people?" Elias adjusted his hat and replied, "That the walk isn't over. But we're not walking alone anymore." Later that evening, back at home, Elias sat in his armchair by the window, watching dusk gather on the horizon. The hum of the streetlight flickered. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby yard. He turned to Miriam. "Funny," he said. "I never wanted to be remembered. I just wanted peace." She reached for his hand. "You gave people more than peace. You gave them clarity." A long pause. "Do you think it'll last?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "Maybe not forever, but maybe just long enough for someone else to carry it forward." In a world obsessed with volume, Elias Brooks taught his town the power of presence, not with shouting, not with spectacle, but with stillness. And in that stillness, Auburn Grove finally listened. Because sometimes the strongest legacies are the ones that never demanded to be heard, but refused to be ignored. Elias Brooks didn't start out seeking attention. He wasn't an activist, a politician, or someone trying to make headlines. He was a retired teacher, a husband, a father, a quiet man who had lived a life of service without asking for applause. All he wanted that day was to walk across a parking lot, retrieve his car, and head home for dinner. But what happened instead became a moment of reckoning, not just for him, but for an entire town. It was in that parking lot, beneath the ordinary gray, of a late afternoon sky that Elias's dignity was mistaken for defiance. His silence was misread as resistance, and his presence, a black elder man holding nothing but a cane, was seen as a potential threat. That single moment, captured by bystanders and watched by millions, revealed something deeply broken. But more importantly, it revealed something quietly powerful. A man who refused to lose himself in the face of injustice. Elias didn't shout. He didn't fight back. He didn't need to. His stillness, his composure, and the legacy of how he had lived his life spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. It wasn't his volume that shook the room. It was his integrity. And when his son Leonard stepped forward, it wasn't as a savior, but as a witness. A man who had inherited not just blood, but values. Leonard didn't rage. He stood. He spoke. He challenged the system without losing his center. Like father, like son, firm, clear, and deeply rooted. The community followed. Old students shared stories of Elias helping them pass exams. Neighbors recalled him planting trees and checking on widows. Children, some of whom never even met him, painted murals in his honor. And Miriam, his ever-steady wife, reminded everyone that strength and softness can live in the same breath. What followed wasn't a protest. It was a movement of hearts. Town officials rewrote policies. The police department was restructured. And perhaps most meaningfully, the people themselves changed. Not because they were told to, but because they had seen what humanity looked like when it stands tall and still. Elias never once called himself a leader. But leadership is not about position. It's about presence. It's about who you are when no one's clapping, when the cameras are off, and when injustice taps you on the shoulder. He lived through the humiliation, not just to survive it, but to transform it. Through his patience, he exposed fear. Through his calm, he dismantled assumptions. And through his very existence, he reminded an entire town that respect must never be conditional. The Brooks family never asked for this spotlight, but once it found them, they chose not to shrink from it. They turned a moment of personal pain into a mirror for society, forcing us all to ask harder questions. Who do we instinctively distrust? What biases live beneath our politeness? And how many moments like this go unnoticed because no one hits record? The lesson here is simple but profound. Dignity is not granted by others. It is something we carry, something we wear every day, regardless of how the world sees us. But it's also a call to action. It asks us to pay attention to how we see others, to question the narratives we've absorbed without challenge, to stand still and stand strong when we see injustice, even if our voice trembles. And it asks us to remember that real change rarely comes from the powerful. It comes from those who've been quiet for too long and finally say, enough. So, what can we take from Elias Brooks and his quiet resistance? We take courage, the courage to show up with grace. We take empathy, to look again before judging. We take memory, to never forget how easily dignity can be stripped and how bravely it can be restored. And above all, we take responsibility, to build communities where no one has to earn the right to be respected. If this story moved you, if it made you think a little deeper, feel a little stronger, or pause just a moment longer before judging someone, then do one simple thing. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button. Because stories like Elias's deserve more than a moment. They deserve a movement. And here on our channel, we don't just tell stories. We tell truths others try to silence. Join us and never miss a story that matters.